Well, today we start a brand new sermon series titled How to Neighbor. And I have to admit that this title is kind of awkward because I always think of neighbor in terms of being a noun, as in a person or a place. But this title is saying that we're using neighbor as a verb, as an action, as something you do. And the reason is, and this comes from Jesus, a concept from Jesus, and I'm aware in a room like this that some of us, some of you might not be a Jesus follower, or you're beginning to ask questions, and that's great, you're in the right place. This is a place for your questions and doubts. But I am a follower of Jesus, and here's something I believe about Jesus. Jesus did not call us to live by our neighbors, to noun our neighbors. Rather, Jesus called us to love our neighbors. And I've had some great neighbors. I currently do. Brian's one of my neighbors. I've got a great neighborhood. And growing up, I actually had some great neighbors. There were some neighbors across the street, the Rouse, Nan and Dave, who were school teachers. Their son Eric was my best friend growing up. He was a year older than me. And these were the kind of neighbors that were always out in the yard. They were always friendly. My parents became good friends with his parents, and they were over there. The Rouse would offer help. They would offer welcome. We sometimes did holidays together. We sometimes went on vacations together. It was one of those relationships, maybe you've had this, where like I didn't knock on the door. I just walked in, just like, hey, I'm here. It was that sort of thing. And I always felt welcomed by these great neighbors. Many years later, after that season of connection with the Rouse had long ended, I was serving at church on the north side of Chicago, in a town called Evanston, Northminster Presbyterian Church. I was a youth pastor there for 9 years, and one of the last years that I was there, I was sitting in worship one day, and I get this tap on the shoulder. And it's Nan Rao, my old neighbor. She had unfortunately divorced and remarried and had moved to Evanston, and she was now attending my church out of the blue, just happenstance. And when I get the chance to go back to Chicago to visit Hannah's family and visit my old church, there's all these people I want to see because it was a great church experience. Wonderful people there. But if Nan's there, of all the people, that's who I sit next to. Because she was a wonderful neighbor. She impacted me. And maybe you had this experience as well, that a neighbor can make an impact on your life that lasts a lifetime. The Rouse also had these other neighbors. They lived across the street from us too. And these people are a little bit strange. Okay, they had kids my age, Eric and ours age, but the kids never played with us, and they didn't really come out. And there was a movie that came out during that period of time. It was called The Burbs. Anybody see this movie, The Burbs? Tom Hanks. And the gist of this movie is that Tom Hanks is living in this neighborhood that's pretty, quiet and normal. And then this strange family moves in. And Tom Hanks and his other friends, they begin to become suspicious of this strange family. And the more that they're suspicious, the more they seem to pick up on things that weren't suspicion. And one of the beauties of the movie is there's this like feedback cycle where like their suspicion creates more suspicion, but you as the viewer don't really know throughout most of the movie, are these people really strange and like dangerous? Or is it just Tom Hanks and his group of friends that are just suspicious and unkind? And in light of this movie, these neighbors that we had, we give them a nickname, and I'm not proud of this, okay? It just is what it is. We called them the Burbs after this movie. Jim Burb, John Burb, Judy Burb, they were all the Burbs. And every time the Burbs did something a little bit strange or out of the ordinary for us, it was comical because we'd already formed an opinion about them. And this is not good, it's just where we were, okay? All right, I'm just being real. And so the Burbs, every Christmas time, everybody would be putting up all their lights and that sort of thing. And for some reason, the Burbs had this like 2 windows on the side of their house, and they'd have a single strand of lights just across, just random, like I don't know what they're doing. We thought that was hilarious. One year they cut down one of their evergreen trees, and like we watched it happen from my kitchen window, and we're like the Burbs are at it again, and like the tree comes down, like squirrels are jumping out of it, it's like half dead, and we're just like making fun of them, which is not good. It was not an example of a good neighbor. We didn't know them. We didn't trust them. Maybe a transferable principle into your life is this, that we tend to distrust the most those we know the least. And we had come to a judgment about these neighbors because they were a little bit different. And we gave them this terrible nickname after this movie and these people in this movie, and so we didn't build a relationship. We didn't have any trust. And perhaps you know by now that at the core of any good relationship, at the core of a good relationship between a husband and a wife, the core of a good relationship between two friends or coworkers is trust. And the less trust we have, the less connection we'll have. In fact, Pew Research in 2016, they did a study about the level of trust between neighbors in America. And they found that roughly half of Americans trust most or all of their neighbors. That's 1 out of every 2 that actually trust their neighbors. And maybe I don't have to tell you what an issue this is, but it is a big issue. Because the lower levels of trust we have means the lower levels of connection. When there's lack of connection, there's an increase in isolation. When there's a lack of connection and something comes up in the neighborhood and there's some sort of issue when we're not connected with each other, those issues tend to become volatile and people get mad and hold grudges because we don't know each other, so we assume the worst. A lack of trust equals a lack of connection. And a neighborhood that is not connected has a high level of dysfunction. In 1989, a sociologist named William Julius Wilson wrote a book called The Truly Disadvantaged, and then he was looking primarily at neighborhoods of high poverty and concentrations of minorities. And what he found by looking at that and the way that the neighborhood affected them was that a neighborhood really could change the outcomes for somebody's health, both mental and physical, their educational attainment, their economic mobility. And he coined this term that is kind of a standard term now within the sociology of poverty. It's the neighborhood effect. And we all know this to be true, because if you grew up in a good neighborhood with supportive neighbors, that's one thing. But for those of us who have grown up in a neighborhood categorized by violence or instability, then that can have a real effect on it. Going back to the Pew Research study. Among those who are 18 to 29 in their study, 39% trust their neighbors. And the authors of the study, they were quite clear in saying that they did not know if this decline in trust among younger people represents a trend in our country. It might. Or if it just represents the life stage of these people, of these younger people. And that makes sense to me because I do like to think that over time, if we not only get older, but we also mature, we can increase in our capacity to trust one another, and then therefore increase in our capacity to build connections and develop strong neighborhoods. Because this is a big issue, and our neighborhoods can impact us for a lifetime. Some of you have had great neighbors, and other of you can tell stories about those difficult neighbors or strange neighbors, but either way, our neighbors can have a huge impact. So I want to take you to Luke chapter 10, and in Luke chapter 10 is the Good Samaritan parable, one of the most wonderful stories, the most powerful stories that Jesus tells, I think, in all 4 of the Gospels. In fact, in a few weeks, we're going to come back to this parable, and we're going to pull from it an idea that is completely different than what we're going to talk about today. This parable is so rich, it's so deep. And here's the deal. I just taught this in our Bible class this morning. It's great for you to hear this parable today. That's great. I'm glad you're here. But the real power comes when this parable, it becomes yours. You're able to tell it, that you know it. Because when you're able to tell one of Jesus' stories, when you know it that well, then it can make a real difference in your life. So I want you to remember where to find it. So everybody repeat after me. Say, Luke. I'm your father.
I'm your father.
Okay. All right. Let's do it your best Darth Vader voice, okay? Luke, I'm your father. Yeah, right? You're going to remember where it's at now, aren't you, right? Okay, so Luke chapter 10. Now hold up your hands, okay? All right, just like this. All right, I apologize if you've lost a finger, but most of us have 10 fingers, right? So where's that? Luke chapter 10. Good Samaritan parable. You should read it. You really should. It's powerful. Jumping into the text. A legal expert. Now, this is not like a legal expert today. This is not a lawyer in a courtroom like when you think about it today or on our television shows. Rather, it's really a religious scholar. Somebody that is well-versed in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Old Testament, the 10 Commandments that you've heard about, but also the 613 other laws, that are in the Jewish tradition, a legal expert stood up to test Jesus. He says, "Teacher, what must I do to gain eternal life?" He asked this question that all of us ask, whether you're religious or not religious, whether you're a Jesus follower or not. We all ask this question. We all wonder at some point in our lives, like, what happens after this? What happens when I die? How can this continue on? Because it's terrifying to think that at some point in time, it's just all over. So he asks this question. Jesus replies, "What is written in the law?" I mean, this guy's a legal expert, plus Jesus understands he's trying to test him, trap him. He says, "How do you interpret the law?" Because we all engage in some interpretation of it. The man says, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being," or some translations say with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, because this is a thinking person's religion, all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus replies to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Not just eternal life, not just like what comes after this life, but if you do this, if you begin to love God and love your neighbor, you will really, truly live. Which is somewhat offensive because we all kind of think we know how to live. But Jesus is saying, look, it's better than you think. There's a way to really live in this world. Next slide. But the legal expert wanted to prove that he was right. He wanted to justify himself. This is not about getting information from Jesus. He's trying to test Jesus, remember? So he says to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, I think that this legal expert, he's trying to trap Jesus, but down deep within him, in his heart is a lot like your heart. Because there's something in you, there's something in me, I think there's something in all of us, and even in this legal expert, this person that's trying to test Jesus, that knows that love has no bounds. That love is unconditional. That God's love is meant not just for the Jewish people or a specific group of people or good people or church people, but for all people. And unfortunately, this legal expert, he was part of a group that had begun to say that really this is all about this specific ethnic group, this Jewish people. There's something in his heart knew that it was extended beyond. But he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor?" Because I want you to tell me. What he's really doing here is he's looking for a loophole. And I got compassion for him because I look for loopholes all the time. I think you probably do too. And sometimes your heart, it tells you that you should like love somebody or reach out to them, but then you find out a bunch of reasons not to. It might get a little too messy. What if they ask for more than I can give? I don't really have time for that. I'm not the kind of person that like reaches out to people like that. Like others are extroverted. Like my other neighbor, like she's great at reaching out to people, but me, that's not me. And our heart tells us to do something, and we come up with all these reasons not to do it. We're looking for loopholes. Sometimes I do this. This is terrible, so forgive me for it. But if there's somebody asking for change on the side of the road, you know what I look at? Their shoes. I figure if they have nice shoes, that maybe they don't need the money that bad, or maybe they're part of this group of people that some talk about that are actually out there scamming us, that sort of thing, which I really don't believe is true, by the way, but there's that theory out there, and there's a part of me that just doesn't want that awkwardness to give that money, and I rarely have cash anyways, and so I'll check out their shoes, and it's like my loophole. It's terrible, don't do that, I'm not recommending it. We all look for loopholes. Jesus, he's brilliant, he knows what's going on. So he doesn't respond directly. Instead, he tells this story. He says, "A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho," which was a well-known journey. There's a path from Jericho to Jerusalem. It's 18 miles. You can walk it today. And at several parts in the path, it is super narrow. Like you have to walk almost in a single file line. A man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He encountered thieves who stripped him naked, beat him up, and left him near death. Now, it just so happened that a priest was going down the same road. And Jesus says the priest sees the man who's stripped naked, been beaten, left for dead, and then he goes to the other side of the road, which is somewhat comical, okay? It's somewhat satirical, sarcastic, because remember, this is the road to Jericho, so narrow that you have to walk in a single file line at points. So you can't go to the other side of the road. Basically, this priest has to step over the man. Likewise, a Levite. And a Levite, just think of it today as like a church leader, one of our prominent lay leaders, an elder or a deacon or a governing board member, somebody that should know them. He comes along by that same spot, sees the injured man, goes to the other side of the road as well. Then a Samaritan, which are the hated people. Like those of you that are Colts fans, you think you hate Patriots fans, right? Like this is like nothing compared to the way a Israelite would hate a Samaritan. They were at odds with each other. The feeling was mutual. But a Samaritan comes along. Jesus, he's poking, he's prodding, he's getting right at the heart of things. A Samaritan who was on a journey came to where the man was. But when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. Jesus tells us that he picks up this man, puts him on his own donkey, takes him to an inn, bandages up his wounds, pays for the man's stay, and then leaves extra money just in case the man needs to stay longer. And then he tells the innkeeper, if that's not enough, I will be back and I will settle the debt. And then Jesus, he turns to the legal expert and says, what do you think? Which one of these three was a neighbor to the man who encountered thieves? You asked, who is my neighbor? Well, what do you think now in light of this story? And the guy says, well, the one who had compassion. Jesus says to him, go and do likewise. In this story, it is so powerful because what Jesus does is that he takes this question, who is my neighbor? Who is justified to receive my help? And he changes the question and he asks us, it's not about who is your neighbor, it's about being a neighbor. And when you make that shift from being who is my neighbor to just am I a good neighbor, all of a sudden your neighbor can be anyone and everyone. And Christians throughout history, Christians in this church, in this community, have begun to understand that and have extended their love and their care and their concern all over the place. Last year, we went on the Appalachian Service Project for the second time, and we extended the love of neighbor down to people in Virginia. The year before that, in West Virginia, by rehabbing homes. A generation ago, when our parsonage was built, that house right across the parking lot over there, another home was built in St. Louis for a group of adults who needed housing. It is a tradition here to collect school supplies through our Women's Guild to support a home down in Louisville for at-risk kids with behavioral difficulties. Churches have understood that anyone and everyone can be our neighbor. And the extent and the extension of a church's love, of a Christian's love, has gone beyond boundaries and borders that we would normally think of. And I celebrate it. And I think we should continue to do that, but there's a loophole in this. We got to be careful. Because sometimes we much prefer to go on a mission trip where we can engage with people a couple states over and then leave. Or to write a check where we don't have to actually face the people, but we just send a check, and sending checks is good. In other words, there's a tendency in all of us to do the love of neighbor at arm's length. I want to help them, I just don't want to know them. I want to help them, I just don't want to get overly involved. And here's the question that I have, and this is a driving question behind this entire sermon series, and it's this. What if when Jesus said love your neighbors, he meant your actual neighbors? Like the people who live next to you? The people that live across the street? What if he meant your actual neighbors? I spent my vacation reading a book called The Art of Neighboring. Yeah, that's what I do on vacation. And on the cover of this book is this grid, and I was like, well, what's that about? And in like the first chapter, I discovered what it was, and I wish I would have never seen it. Because this man, he talks about how he and his wife, every time they've moved, they've created this grid, and they put it up on their back door. And as they get to know their neighbors, they begin to fill in this grid. And A is the names of their neighbors. Sometimes it's just the first name. Sometimes it's the full name. It's the names of the kids, the pets. They begin to fill it in. And then they begin to fill in relevant information under letter B. And this is not that like they drive a yellow car or things you can see from the driveway, but relevant information like they grew up in Wisconsin, or they went to IU, or they have this political leaning, or they go to this church. It's relevant information about their neighbors. Stuff you would learn when you're still an acquaintance with one another. Over time, because they were very intentional about neighboring, they would get to know some of these neighbors in depth. And in letter C, they begin to put in some in-depth information about the neighbors. Some of their hopes, some of their neighbors' dreams, some of the sources of pain, that they lost their mother or lost a job, their religious beliefs, all the things that are deep and central to who we are. And this simple practice would help them be a force for good in their neighborhood. So how do you do all this? Because you've got it in your bulletin. And I hope that maybe you'll stay here after the worship service and sit down and try to fill that out the best you can. Or make one for yourself, maybe much bigger, and put it on your back door if you don't know your neighbors, and start to write it down. So that you get to know people. Because here's the bottom line for today's message. You must know your neighbors to love your neighbors. I mean, to really love your neighbors, you got to know their names. You got to know something about them. Same goes for here in our community. That's why we have pictures up, and we want to take more of those. We want to help people get to know each other better. That's why we encourage you to wear name tags. We'll get you one if you need one. Because we want to know each other. Because to know somebody, or to love somebody, you got to know them. And I just want you to imagine for a moment. What would it be like? What would it be like if you knew all your neighbors? What would happen to your neighborhood if there was somebody, maybe it's you, maybe it's not, but there's somebody who got really intentional about getting to know people and getting people connected? Think about how a neighborhood could change. What if a group of Christians like us really took this seriously, took Jesus' command to love our neighbors seriously, and we went out into the various communities in which we lived? And we started becoming very intentional about building relationships. Not because we're trying to get something from anybody. We're not even trying to get them to come to church, although we'll talk about inviting people to church. We're just trying to get to know them because Jesus says, no matter what, be a neighbor. Love them. What a difference would that make in your neighborhood? What a difference would that make in our communities, in our city? And how would that change you? Because some of us, we come home to a house. Others of us, we come home to a neighborhood, to a group of people we know, that we love. And I think Jesus, that's part of his plan to change the world, person by person. Do this, he says, you'll really live. Let us pray. Gracious Lord, I thank you for Luke chapter 10. And in it, the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is so powerful. And God, yes, we are compelled to love anybody and everybody. God, let us never lose sight of that. But Lord, help us. Help us not to be afraid to get into the messiness of loving our actual neighbors. And let us not be stopped by the fact that we feel like we have no time, or that we're afraid, or we don't know where it's going to go. Lord, we're going to address that in the weeks to come. So I pray all these people come back and bring their friends. God, just give us a conviction leaving here today that you have planted us where you need us, in our neighborhoods, among people that you want us to love. Guide us as we do that. In Jesus' name.